throughout Town Hall. Upon exiting this room, the main exits are located to the front and the rear of the building. Please do not use the elevator. The meeting is being recorded and will stream live online. If you do not wait to see the outcome of any particular item and you want to know what happened, you can always call the town clerk's office tomorrow after 9 a.m. We will start by calling the roll. Present.
Present.
In addition to the board, we have here from the town attorney's office, Nora Robshaw, and we have the CEO, Dan Ulatowski. Our next meeting will be November 14th at 6:30 p.m. here in this building. To begin the meeting, do we have a motion with respect to the minutes? I will second. Two people I know were not here, so Member Bray and Member Phillips will abstain. Do we have any opposition from the other members? No. Hearing none, that carries 3-0. We do have tonight on the agenda 11 items to get through. I am going to move up number 8 to be heard first. That would be 4196 Sheridan Drive. Do we have the petitioner's attorney in the room? Yes, we do.
Good evening, members of the Zoning Board of Appeals. Ari Goldberg from the law firm of Barclay Damon for the applicants. Thank you for adjusting the agenda. So this matter first appeared before you on June 13th. At that time, if you recall, there was significant public testimony in support of the continued use of this property for the landscape business that's been there for over 40 years. A lot of the testimony also focused on the character of the applicants and how they are dedicated to the town of Amherst, dedicated to making the use work in this area. There was also at the same time concern from the planning department and one member of the public about the continued use there. So recognizing that and recognizing that this is an area of the town of Amherst that is changing, we worked with the town attorney's office and the housing court to come up with a scheme by which the use would continue for a minimum of 12 months, and then we would come back to this zoning board to determine if a shorter temporary use permit of approximately 6 months would work out. The way it works is there's 2 6 months, they're called ACDs, adjournment and contemplation of dismissal with the housing court. The first one requires that the applicants clean up a northern portion of the property, meaning they restore it to grass, they remove some of the commercial operations and push everything south of Town Ditch 5C that runs through the property. If everything is completed to the satisfaction of the building department during that first 6 months, it entitles the applicant to a second 6-month adjournment and contemplation of dismissal, during which another portion, a southern portion of the property is cleaned up as well. During this first 2 6-month stints, this 12-month period, the applicant is working diligently to explore alternative locations outside of the town of Amherst. They explored several locations within the town of Amherst. We consulted with the planning department on a few of those prospects. None of them would really work for the applicant, so they're looking to relocate entirely. And we think that by the time those 2 6 months adjournment and contemplations of dismissal expire, that we would then be in a position to have one final approval from the zoning board, a 6-month temporary use permit, while we finish the complete relocation, and of course approvals on the other end, whatever that location may be. So what we're requesting before you is, considering the scheme worked out with housing court and the town attorney's office, would be an adjournment of 12 months. During that time, we will comply with the terms of the ACDs, we will work on a relocation, and then we will come back to this board 12 months from now and to discuss the possibility of a final 6-month temporary use permit for this use. Here to answer any questions of the board and the public.
Before we begin the discussion, I placed this on the record last time, but some board members were not here. I will abstain from this item on the agenda for 2 reasons. Number 1, there's a pending case in Amherst Town Court where I am currently serving as the court administrator. Number 2, I will likely be taking over housing court when I hopefully take the bench in January. So I will be abstaining from this petition.
Mr. Goldberg, I just have a question. Wouldn't it make more sense just to withdraw this and then bring it back
12 months.
Could do that. Part of it was the logistics, I think, of the applications already submitted. It's really, we'd want to ensure an agenda position in a timely manner so that there's no gaps between expiry of the ACD and coming here. I'll happily take cues from the planning department on what they prefer and what is logistically best.
We concur with Member Schubert that a withdrawal might be easier. We're more than happy to work with your client should they not
Yeah.
prove to find a location in a timely manner, but I think it would be easier on us. We're more than happy to work with Mr. Goldberg should he need to reapproach this board, but there will be new membership next year. Why not let's just hear this at the appropriate time? But that's for the board to decide.
The withdrawal would not prejudice the applicant in any way. Is that right? Okay.
Would you prefer that be adjourned for until the next meeting so you have an opportunity to talk to your clients about that?
No, I think withdrawal is acceptable. I'm authorized to take whatever action is necessary to preserve their rights and what works best for the town. So if withdrawal is the preference of the board, then, and the planning department, I guess, formally withdraw the 4196 temporary use permit and resubmit at an appropriate time.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We will now pivot back to number 1 on the agenda, which is 185 Smith Road.
Good evening. My name is Todd Slowinski. I am co-owner and resident at 185 Smith Road. If you guys don't know, Smith Road is up north in Amherst, and I'm proposing to put up a 30 by 40 pole barn for cold storage, and I'm going to need a variance because of the small square footage of our house. I am out of room to store things. The one-car garage we have is filled with kids' toys. My wife's car cannot fit in the garage. I have things stored outside, which I would love to put them inside. I also work for the town of Amherst Highway Department, and 6 months out of the year, I am on call for snow and ice, and to have a vehicle parked inside a garage would greatly benefit me and increase my time to get to work. So I'm not disturbing anything but green grass. I have no trees there. All my neighbors are fine with it. There's only one neighbor that only be able to see it. The other side is separated by a wood line. And I've talked to him multiple times, and he has no problems with it whatsoever.
Okay. I also would note that your petition says that at least 6 other houses on your street have
There are
similar.
26 total houses on my street. 10 of them have similar or even bigger pole barn sizes on the street. So 1/3 of that street. Most of the houses have at least 1.5 acres of property. I have 2 acres. We're a little bit more spread out up there.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
And where would you be pulling the drive-through on the,
It would come down the side of the house, where the garage is facing the left-hand side. Yep, straight there. With more than 10 feet in between me and my neighbor's house. That's all been accounted for.
Anything else from the board? Okay, do we have anyone here from the audience to speak on this petition? Okay, no one's coming forward, so we will close the public hearing at this time. Do we have any further discussion or any motions?
Move to approve?
Second.
Okay, I believe that the balancing test was addressed in the petition sufficiently. Do we have any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, it's approved 5-0.
Thank
All
you.
set. Okay, number 2 on the agenda is 106 LeBrun Circle. We did receive word late in the day that they were requesting an adjournment, so we will adjourn that item to the next meeting. Moving on to number 3, that is 1 Sable Run.
Thank you, members of the board. Matt Fitzgerald from Phillips Lytle, here today on behalf of the applicant. So we represent Bill Grieshober and his wife, Mary Jo Herscher. They're the owners of 1 Sable Run. The application before you is fairly straightforward. We are proposing to construct an addition to an existing garage, 228 square feet. The reason we require variance relief is because although looking at this, you may think to yourself that the top portion of this is the side yard. because we are a corner lot, it is in fact the rear yard, which makes the setback a required 30-foot setback instead of a lesser setback. As such, there's a variance request of 6.12 feet required. I will say that one thing that we did submit today was a petition that included signatures from the property owners surrounding the property, including, most importantly, the house you see right there to the left on the screen. That's the property owner who abuts the rear yard from which we request relief. They have no problem with this. They signed the petition, a copy of which has been submitted to the board for your records. I know the board is very familiar with the variance test under Town Law 267B. It's a balancing test, benefit to the applicant versus detriment to the community. I'll summarize the benefit to the applicant very simply. There's simply not enough space in the garage to store things like, for example, a snowblower. And anyone who lived in Amherst, as I did last year during the winter storm and couldn't access their snowblower because your cars were in the way, knows that if you could have a garage that's off to the side, another opening for something like that, it's a huge advantage. It's also the reason we don't go to the back of the property. Same exact reason, putting it further back behind the cars doesn't solve that problem. In addition, we'd be getting closer to that property line from that neighbor. We know that this neighbor here is fine with what we're proposing to do. Rather than bother that property owner, we decided that this would be the most efficient way to go forward. Our papers speak to the specifics of the variance balancing test. I'll say character of the neighborhood. Again, this is a very minor expansion of an existing garage. With respect to other alternatives, I just walked through that really there's no other alternative that would achieve the benefit to the applicant that we're looking to get. In terms of it being substantial, again, in a 30-foot setback, just over 6 feet of relief, we'd respectfully submit that this is far from substantial, particularly in light of the fact that we have neighbor consent from the northern property owner. Physical or environmental conditions, very briefly, I would just say that a minor garage expansion is not going to pose the kind of impacts that this standard would typically invoke, particularly with respect to traffic or stormwater or things like that. Finally, self-created. While this may consider to be self-created to some extent because it is the applicant's home, again, they're trying to do what they can do to support their family and ensure that they have ready access and storage on site. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have. Otherwise, I would submit the application as is.
Thank you. I do understand before we start a discussion that one member may need to recuse from this petition. I'll let Ron place that on the record.
Yes, I have to abstain from this matter because Mr. Fitzgerald and I are from the same firm.
Okay, thank you. So it was just the four of us voting. Do we have any questions? Nope. Is there anyone here from the audience to speak on this petition? No one's coming forward. We'll close the public hearing at this time. Do we have a motion?
Moved.
Second.
Okay, the young counselor did a great job with going through the balancing test, so I don't think we need to go through that. Any opposition? Hearing none, that is granted 4-0.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Next up, we have number 4, which is 199 to 203 Park Club Lane.
Hi, everyone. James Kennedy from the Roswell Park Administration. You might recognize that this is the first time we're appearing before you on behalf of the administration, not that we're an attorney or anything like that. I did think that the documentation that was submitted to you grossly underserved what we should have submitted, and I wanted to correct it for the record. So my name is James Kennedy. I'm from Roswell Park. The variances we're seeking today are totally in line with patient wayfinding. This is about patients possibly passing the Park Club Lane facility, missing it, and turning around inside of the neighborhood. So I wanted to kind of go over what I would have written. We did go through a contractor. This was submitted through a contractor. I imagine that the contractor did the best job that they could, but I did not think that it was suffice to the zoning board, so I wanted to go over that. So the character of the neighborhood, the proposed signage does not face the neighborhood and is meant to reduce the number of patients who would miss the building and possibly turn around in the neighborhood. Other alternatives, we believe this is the best alternative based on patient wayfinding and safety. Substantial in nature, we do not believe that these signs standalone by themselves are substantial in nature, but we do think it will have a substantial impact on patient navigation, especially when it is dark outside. A lot of our patients will start their chemotherapy and their treatments earlier than 7 a.m. when it is still sometimes dark outside, especially in those winter months, and stay at the Scott Buehler Amherst Center past 5 p.m. when it is dark out. So that is why there is some lighting on those signs, those 6-foot signs. Physical or environmental conditions, we do not believe there is a substantial impact on the environment. or noise or anything inside of the neighborhood. I do think better patient wayfinding the first time the patient drives down Park Club Lane will lead to less patients turning around on side streets inside of the neighborhood. And prior variances, I do think it's a total mistake by Roswell Park and everybody involved that this was not included in our initial variance application. You might notice this is our second time in front of you. This is my first time in front of you, but it was a mistake to not include these patient wayfinding measures in the first time around, and I apologize for that. And I'm open to answer any questions. I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay. Is anyone here from the audience to speak on this petition? No one's coming forward. We'll close the public hearing. Do we have any comments or motions? I'll move to approve.
Second.
I think we've gone through the tests sufficiently. And obviously, cancer patients finding their way is very important. So, any opposition? None. Okay, 5-0, passes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hard one.
Okay, next up on the agenda is item number 5, 1720, 1740, and 1740. I don't know why that's twice, Maple Road. Oh, 1760 is the last one.
Yes, good evening, Chairperson Nichols and members of the Zoning Board of Appeals. Sean Hopkins on behalf of the applicant, PB Investors, care of Paul Bliss. We're here this evening in connection with a request for 2 area variances for the mixed-use project to be located at 1720 through 1740 and 1760 Maple Road. Time to go next slide. It's a project site located slightly west of the intersection of Maple and Air. Just to acclimate everyone, Mr. Bliss's Faybrook Senior Housing Project is directly across the street, and the pediatric urgent care is located directly to the east at the actual intersection of Maple and Air. Next slide. The copy of the site plan. The project site consists of slightly more than 5.18 acres. We're proposing 2 mixed-use buildings along Maple Road, one that's parallel and one that's perpendicular. Building number 2, which is perpendicular, does include approximately 7,000 square feet of first-floor neighborhood commercial space. We're showing 2 two-story townhome buildings consisting of 11 units on the rear of the site, then single-story garages, and a 6-foot fence as recommended by the town's Design Advisory Board. It is important to note the town board rezoned this site to DC5, and we've made an effort working closely with numerous stakeholders, including planning department staff, to try and maximize our compliance with the many stringent standards that apply to that mixed-use zoning district. Next slide. Slide shows a snowstorm. The copy of the site plan that was actually previously approved for a medical office building. We think what we're proposing is much better than what was previously approved. Next slide. So the project review process actually began way back in March 21st of 2022. Both the planning board and the town board held 2 separate public hearings in connection with the request to amend the comprehensive plan and rezone the project site. Ultimately, on February 13th of this year, the town board approved the rezoning of the project site to DC5 and issued a negative declaration subject to 5 conditions. Our project layout does comply with each of those conditions. Next slide. It's also important to note that we did present this project to the Design Advisory Board, both during its meetings in May and its meeting on September 28th, and they've recommended approval of the site plan by the Planning Board, and the architecture and site layout reflects very substantial input they provided as part of that extensive review process. Next slide. So we're asking for 2 area variances. Area variance number 1 pursuant to section 5A49 of the zoning code, and that pertains to ground story height. Under the zoning code, buildings 1 and 2, which have a front yard setback of less than 30 feet as measured from the Maple Road right-of-way, would strictly require a 2-foot height on the ground floor. We are not accommodating that. It is important to note we originally had a layout with the 30-foot setback provided. However, the town's senior fire inspector asked us to move the buildings closer to Maple Road in order to accommodate safe emergency access. pursuant to Appendix D of the Fire Code. And then area variance number 2, as you can see, we have various street designations as required by the Mixed Use District, DC5. We have a core street running east to west that actually connects to the driveway for the urgent care, runs all the way out to Air. We think that'll be a pretty cool feature. It's got sidewalks on both sides, parallel parking spaces, pedestrian crossings, substantial green space and plantings. However, we also have a local street which is on the western portion of the site. Per section 5A65D of the code, that would also require parallel parking. We really just don't have room for parallel parking there. And 2 important factors that make that difficult. Number 1, that is actually our only new additional curb cut onto Maple Road. So having parallel parking right when you turn in or out would be a little awkward. And secondly, there is an existing ditch directly to the west that is located on the project site. There is no current easement in place. The town's engineering department has asked for a 45-foot easement. We will accommodate that request, but as such, we have to leave that area undeveloped. And you can see that's labeled existing town ditch. Next slide. Next slide. So I do want to note, again, as I indicated, we've really made an effort to design this project in accordance with the design standards and the comprehensive plan. This is a figure pulled directly out of the comprehensive plan. And what it shows is the preferred course of mixed-use development, larger buildings out along the frontage, then townhomes, and then an existing residential project. That's exactly what we're doing, except we've also incorporated garages and landscaping on the back. So we're really made an effort, again, working closely with many stakeholders to accommodate the design criteria in the comp plan. Next slide. Copy of the landscaping plan, not particularly relevant for the area variances, but this will be a very green site, 39% green space, and approximately 700 new plantings. So compared to the site conditions today, this will look very nice once it's completed. Next slide. Just going to walk you through the elevations. This is the elevation of the 2 mixed-use buildings. The top shows you the building on the west, and then the building that's perpendicular on the eastern portion of the site. Next slide. And that's from the Maple Road frontage. Next slide. It's additional elevation. Next slide. And then the 2-story townhomes on the back. All of these reflect a lot of input received by the Design Advisory Board. While they're not 3-dimensional drawings, all of these buildings have very diverse, high-quality materials and a lot of vertical and horizontal relief. Next slide. So these are the 2 key slides. Obviously, any request for area variances is governed by the balancing test and the 5 criteria set forth in New York State Town Law, Section 267B3B, which requires this board to balance the benefits that were received by the applicant and weigh those against any resulting detriments to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood or surrounding community. Here the benefits are clearly stated. We've been working on this project since March 21st of last year. The layout reflects substantial input. We believe the requested relief is minor in the scheme of the overall project. Area variance criteria number 1, whether granting the requested relief will result in undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood or detriment to nearby properties. We believe the answer to that criteria is no. It will have absolutely no impact on the residential neighborhood to the north. And in fact, by having the buildings closer to Maple Road, it's beneficial from their perspective. Criteria number 2, whether there's some feasible alternative to the requested relief that would allow us to still receive the benefits we're seeking, and the answer is no. And again, I want to emphasize, originally we did have 30-foot front yard setback for both those mixed-use buildings. They were moved closer at the request of the town's senior fire inspector. Next slide. Area variance criteria number 3, is the requested relief substantial? And of course, the key inquiry there is whether or not any harm will result. It's our position no harm will result from the granting the requested relief. Criteria number 4, whether the granting the requested relief will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood. Both the planning board, both the town board has previously issued negative declarations on both July 25th of last year and February 13th of this year. The project does comply with all technical standards. We will be making some off-site sanitary sewer improvements at the request of the engineering department. So we think the answer to that criteria is also no. And then the final criteria, which is relevant but cannot be determinative, is whether or not the alleged difficulty is self-created. Obviously, we asked for DC5 zoning. We thought it was much better than GB, which would have actually allowed taller buildings. So we'll accept the fact that it can be viewed as being a self-created difficulty. But we think overall the balancing test and the 4 criteria provide ample justification for the requested relief. The additional slides just summarize seeker aspects of the project. I don't think they're particularly important this evening. So what we're respectfully asking is that you grant the 2 requested area variances. And if there's any questions, either myself or Mr. Bliss would welcome the opportunity to address them. Thank you.
Okay. Sounds like Member Schubert has some questions.
I'm just, maybe, we've gone through this before, but maybe you can help me
Okay.
through this again. The ground story elevation, 2 feet is required, and you're suggesting 0 feet.
Right.
What is that all about?
So under,
Are we saying that the building will actually be lower?
it'll be built to grade. What the provision in the zoning code requires is what I view as more of a brownstone look, what I view as more of an urban context. I think you did grant a similar variance for Uniland earlier this year. So again, we think there's ample justification that would also add 2 additional feet of height to the buildings. And while it can be done, one of the challenges in connection with that type of design is typically then you result with what I call what is that called? Where you have the guard level, the floor that's below grade, as you remember the project at 3980 Bailey. We're not proposing that. It does pose some challenges in terms of ADA accessibility
This
as
is
well.
lowering the height.
Yeah. So instead of it being 2 foot when you enter, it can be at grade.
Thank you.
And as you can see, with respect to the townhomes, there's still stairs and a front entrance and all that stuff.
Any other questions? Okay, is there anyone here from the audience to speak on this petition? Okay, no one's coming forward, so we will close the public hearing at this time. Mr. Hopkins has gone through the test. Do we have any motions?
Move to approve.
Would that be both requests
both.
at the same time?
Second.
Do we have any opposition to the motions? Hearing none, both requests are granted 5-0.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
All right, you too. All right, next up, we have number 6, which is 1340 Millersport Highway.
Hello, my name is Joe C. I work with Masaccio Architects. I'm here presenting on behalf of the applicant, Amherst Lodging. We're proposing a 6,300 square feet partial rooftop bar with indoor and outdoor space to the existing Marriott Hotel at 1340 Millersport Highway. We're requesting an area variance to allow an additional story above the 10th floor. You can see here by the elevations that the existing rooftop bar height will not be any higher than the existing Marriott sign there. That's the elevator equipment height. So we're actually like 7 feet below that. So there was, I believe, a variance granted in 1979 to allow the 10 stories because this isn't a zoning district above. The height is below what the required height is. This is above the required height that's in the zoning district. So
Okay. I assume that the object is to build a restaurant bar.
yeah, so the object is really a bar. It's like a lounge area, primarily for the hotel guests, but it's also for public use. It's really to give like another, area for them to go. Nice views on the roof of Amherst and the surrounding town. So that's the idea.
So you wouldn't be able to achieve that with any other means other than,
Other than on the roof, that's correct, yes.
okay. Does anyone have any other questions?
I'm just having a difficult time visualizing it. Is this like a rooftop bar or is this a additional floor?
It's an additional floor. So yeah, so it is an enclosed rooftop bar area. Actually, if you could go to the floor plans, it might help visualize what we're looking to build. So yeah, so there will be elevator and stair access to the 11th floor. This will be like basically an 11th floor. So the existing building has 10 floors. This will basically be an 11th floor, mostly enclosed indoor bar area with some food prep. It's not a restaurant by any means. Its main uses for bar use. There will be some outdoor seasonal patio area, next to the indoor space as well, to enjoy the views. So yeah, it's really just, light bar food, so not a restaurant.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
And this is the Marriott sign that you were showing in that elevation is the existing Marriott sign.
The Marriott sign, this is, the design's still in flux as far as, the exterior aesthetics and that sort of thing. But yeah, that Marriott sign, depending on the height of this now, may have to shrink a little. But yeah, for all intents and purposes, that's the existing sign.
So that sign is there right now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Is anyone here from the audience to speak on this petition? All right, no one's coming forward. We'll close the public hearing. Any motions or other conversation?
Motion for approval?
Okay, I think we've hit on the points in the balancing test. Do we have any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, the request is granted 5-0, and you're all set.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Next up, we have item number 7, which is 6040 North Bailey Avenue. Is that Palumbo? Oh, Baglia. Is he coming? Is anyone here for 6040 North Bailey Avenue? Okay. Since no one's coming forward, we'll try calling it again at the end of the meeting. We've already taken care of item number 8, so we'll move on to item number 9, 73 Brockton Ridge. Brockton Ridge.
Hello, I'm Jeff Palumbo on behalf of Morano. Connection with the variance for Brockton Ridge. Just give you some detail. The home is, as you are aware, is in Graythorne. It measures approximately 2,900 square feet, just over that, 2,917. And the ordinance allows lot coverage, in this case of 40%, which would be 2,832 square feet. And the reason why we're slightly over by 85 square feet is the porch in the back has a cover on it, and therefore it is considered to be an accessory structure, and it is included in the square footage. So in this case, the purchaser of the home is downsizing a home from approximately 6,700 square feet to this one, which was approximately 3,000 or 2,900 square feet. So substantial discussion and plan revisions were went into effect for months prior to coming up with this plan. And then when it was submitted to the building department, it was then determined that we were over by 85 square feet. So we filed this variance application. I think it's important to note that there are no other variances, there are no setback variances being considered. The other thing that I think is important is that the porch will be there either way. The only question is the cover on the porch. So we did submit an analysis on the benefit versus the detriment to the neighborhood, and we would submit to you that there really is no detriment to the neighborhood. This is a small area, 85 square feet in excess of what is allowed, and as I think I indicated, it's the size of a small bedroom. So will there be an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood? No, we don't think so. Again, the patio will be there either way, and I don't think by putting a roof on it that it has any impact in terms of the character of the neighborhood. Can it be realized any other feasible way? I guess the answer to that is you could take the roof off, but in our client's mind and in the purchaser's mind, that's not feasible, because that's one of the important things to her, is having a roof over the porch. Is the request substantial? And as I indicated in our application, I think this is the very definition of insubstantial, in that is only 3% over the allowable square footage. And will it have any adverse effect on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood? No, certainly it doesn't have any impact on flooding or drainage or traffic or anything like that. And is it self-created? To the extent that the home is in excess of the maximum square footage, you can determine that it is self-created, but that is only one factor, as you know, for the board's consideration. And I think overall, we hope you come to the same conclusion that we did, that the benefit outweighs any detriment to the health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood.
Okay, any questions? All right, is anyone here from the audience to speak on this one? No one's coming forward. We'll close the public hearing. Do we have any motions?
Moved.
Okay, and we've already gone through the test, so do we have any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, it's approved 5-0.
Thank you.
That will take us right into number 10 on the agenda, which is 190 Maple Road. Okay. He has the last two. No, I've got it.
Oh, that's.
Yeah.
For the record, I'm Jeff Palumbo, representing the petitioner, 190 Maple Road. You're all very familiar with this proposal, but just to refresh your recollection, back in April of 2017, the Zoning Board of Appeals approved a use variance with the condition that the area shaded in pink or red, whatever that color is, remain as open space. It's approximately 0.55 acres in size. We have maintained that open space since the building was built, and doing our best to contain parking within the site. But as I indicated last time, everything that happens over there kind of impacts the parking, including the closure of the parking in front of the building on Maplemere. We lose some spots when the snow is sufficiently high that it takes up a couple of the parking spots. So it's been a problem, and we hope to alleviate the problem by adding the additional 37 spaces, which divides the property essentially in half. The mitigating factors that I indicated last time are that we will build a 6-foot wood fence along the neighbors' backyards, along our property line. We will have dark sky lighting. We will make sure that the parking is used for only staff and nurses and doctors, so the employees of the facility itself. And there will be no parking in that area on the weekends. The only time that they're there is Saturday occasionally from 9 to 12, but the hours are primarily Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 o'clock. So the one question that came up last time from the neighbors, or not the only question, but the most prevalent question, had to do with the existing alleged drainage issue along their rear property lines, and the fact that they have standing water for periods of time throughout the year. We did engage an engineer to take a preliminary look at it, and he's indicated to us that he believes that if this board approves it and the site plan is approved, that when that takes place, that we will be able to accommodate any of their water into our facilities that we will be building for our property. So instead of taking my word for it, I think what I would suggest to the board and ask the board to consider is an approval that conditions the approval on the ultimate approval of the engineering department when the site plan is submitted. So very simply, either we cure the problem and the engineering department confirms that, or we don't. And if we don't, based on your conditional approval, there won't be a parking lot. If we do introduce evidence to the engineering department that we can accept their water and take care of it sufficiently, then the parking lot would be built. So that's what I'm asking. And the reason why we don't actually do the work now is our client is hesitant to spend the $10,000 that it will take to do the study if the board's going to deny the application. And that's why I'm recommending to get around that issue, have a conditional approval based on the engineering department's approval that we take care of the water sufficiently, and if not, we don't build it.
Okay.
So that's it.
Does anyone have questions?
I have a question to Mr. Ulatowski. Would that work in terms of having conditional approval? Engineering department would sign off on drainage to the adjoining property?
Can you hear me? So if
Not
this
really.
were not a matter before you, it would be a matter before the planning board anyway. Planning board will see this after you either relinquish the condition. Assuming you relinquish the condition, the planning board will look at this. We will coordinate with the engineering office. They will have to produce a professionally prepared drainage and grading plan by a civil engineer. Our civil engineer and engineering would review the calculations and the design and concur with the proposed design. So there will always be a stopgap measure. We won't allow for impacts to neighboring land uses. I think what Mr. Palumbo is suggesting, that they would be willing to take any overland flow of water from the neighbors to the north to allow that to occur. But whether it will work or not, it certainly can be engineered in any fashion. They can do pipe storage below the parking lot if they can accommodate surface storage of the water. It's just what method they wish to pursue it, but we wouldn't allow any impacts to occur.
But they would lose the open space that was a condition of the prior approval.
Correct. They would not have the benefit of the open space that the previous zoning board of appeals placed as a condition. So that's what you have to decide, whether or not that was a reasonable condition, and should you grant the relief for it.
And again, only half of the open space would be removed. The remainder would be there as a vegetative buffer, and if you've been out there and you saw the pictures last time, it's very thick.
Can you show where you would be preserving the open space?
Right there. That is the, yep, right behind the houses. There'll also be a fence there, and the landscaping, if the planning department wants additional landscaping on top of the green space buffer, we would be doing that as well.
So if we were to approve this conditioned approval, it would go to the planning board for further review and approval?
If you release the current condition, the next step for the petitioner would be to file an amendment to the previously approved site plan, which would then go to our planning board, because I believe it's within 250 feet of a residential property, so we would deem it a major action. Planning board would have a public hearing. We would do internal review with the highway department, engineering office, fire safety, and everyone to confirm that this can be properly designed and mitigated for.
And Dan, we could also impose a condition with respect to that green space, correct? That there perhaps be additional landscaping to help shield the view of the parking.
You can certainly ask that they supplement that green space, depending on how they may have to grade it to allow for the overland flow of water in the easterly direction. You may want to ask that the petitioner, as a condition of relieving this condition, that they agree to provide supplemental green space at the direction of our landscape architect to protect those residences.
And the number of parking spaces you're adding, is that based on use needs, or is it just to fill up the space you have there?
It's based on, it's 37 spaces. We actually need more than that, but that's what we felt was an adequate compromise by only including half of it. And in terms of the landscaping, you know, I think the only thing we have to be careful of is we will agree to additional landscaping. That's not a problem. We just don't want to remove existing vegetation to put in new vegetation. So that's why I think Dan's suggestion that we work with the planning staff on that, we have no problem with that.
Okay. Anyone else?
Just out of curiosity, how many How many people do you have on staff in the facility, like doctors, nurses?
There's 45 people there on a daily basis, staff, doctors, nurses.
And about how many patients are seen in the facility daily?
Oh, there's generally, that's a good question. My recollection is that there's generally 10 patients at least in there on an hourly basis, right?
And how many, I don't remember from the last hearing, how many parking spots are there presently?
79.
If you wanted to ask the petitioners to also put a night circuit just on that parking lot, so that when it's not in operation, no one's using it, the light should be, it could be killed, so that could be a reasonable mitigation as well.
We don't even care if there's lights, except for safety purposes, you might want some.
Okay. I know we closed the public hearing the last time, but we've just heard a lot more information. So is there anyone here with respect to this petition? Okay. I guess we're not reopening the public hearing. Do we want to have some discussion as a board, or does anyone have any motions? And we do have a negative declaration. Do we have any motions with respect to that? Okay. I'll second. Any opposition to the motion for approving the neg deck? Any opposition? No opposition, so that will carry 5-0. Any conversation or motions with respect to the variance requests? Anyone? I mean, I'm thinking that all of the conditions we were discussing tonight would certainly have to be a part of any motion. There was some very strong opposition from the neighbors to this petition, both this time and in previous appearances before the board with respect to this property. Though I do just want to point out the fact that the on-street parking is now going to be limited, which is an issue that was not something that we discussed when you had previously come before the board. I don't know if anyone else was on the board at that time. And now on-street parking will be an issue. So I think for safety purposes, it makes sense to have additional parking spaces for patients and employees available. Any thoughts from anyone on that? Okay, so does anyone want to make a motion and try to recite all of these conditions?
I'll move to approve, but it looks like the planning board is going to look at the drainage from the adjoining properties, which was my main concern last time. I think it was, you said planning as opposed to engineering.
Well, engineering will
And-
be an agency, planning board
Right.
will offer site plan approval ultimately.
Mr. Ulatowski mentioned night circuit, which is probably something we could probably work into what we're doing. Supplemental landscaping is another issue. I don't know, that's kind of, it might be
I like the
vague.
way Dan said it, to work with the town landscape architect and take the recommendations of the town's landscaping architect.
So how do we put that into a motion?
So I guess, Ron, you could move to approve, subject to those 3 conditions with respect to the landscape architect for the town providing input and following those recommendations. The night circuit lighting, cutting off the lights, I think, for sure, at the close of business. And I don't know how to word the civil engineer.
Approval of the approval of any recommendations of the engineering department relative to drainage is a
Right.
prerequisite to moving forward.
Yep. I wouldn't want to repeat that, but I think we have all
Does
3.
that summarize your motion?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do we have a second? I'll second. Do we have any opposition to that lengthy motion?
I'm opposed.
Okay. We have one opposed. We have two opposed. Any other opposed? Why don't we just call the roll on that for the record? Aye.
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 Nay.
Okay, so it
Thank you.
passes 3-0 with, or 3-2 with 3 conditions that I'm
Thank
not
you.
repeating.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Next up on the agenda is item number 11, which is 4831 Harlem Road.
Good evening again. I'm Jeff Palumbo on behalf of the petitioner, Peter Demakis, who is also here with me this evening. Thank you for adjourning this last time. Peter was not able to make it, so we appreciate you doing that for us. So the property, as you have indicated, is located at 4831 Harlem Road. Mr. Demakis has owned the property for approximately 15 years. It measures 112 feet of frontage along Harlem Road by approximately 220 feet in depth, which makes it a little unusual in terms of the depth and the amount of space on that property. The request tonight before the board is for an open development area. And essentially what we would like to do is split the property, as you see here, in half, so that each lot would have approximately 8,920 square feet, which would comply with the lot requirements in the R3 zoning district that the property finds itself in. There would also be a 20-foot driveway, as you see here, on the south end of the property, so that both parcels could access that driveway out to Harlem Road. So, as you're all, I'm sure, very familiar, we are requesting an open development area under Section 280-A of the -A of the New York State Town Law, which allows the building commissioner to issue a building permit for lots that don't have frontage on a public street. And in this case, that would be Lot 2. It has no frontage on a public street, but it does have the access, which is in excess of the minimum of 15 feet prescribed by the New York State Town Law, Section 280-A. Mr. Demakis has attempted to sell this property in the past. Over the past 15 years, there's been a sign on the property for the last several years. There's very little interest in the property. I can tell you that the price that Mr. Demakis was seeking was not exorbitant. It's just under $90,000, which is far less than many lots are in the town of Amherst these days. But it's a pretty big lot, and people just don't seem to be able to want that size lot. They'd rather have what we're proposing here, have 2 lots there instead of 1. So that's the reason for the request in front of you. I think one of the advantages of having this is that we would agree that driveways be onto the private road, so therefore there would not be a driveway onto Harlem Road, which I think is some kind of an advantage. But
Sorry to interrupt you. I didn't understand what you just said.
well, I was saying, instead of having one driveway, the private driveway out to Harlem, and then a separate driveway for Lot 1 out to Harlem, both of them would access the private drive.
Thank
So
you.
instead of having 2 access points onto Harlem, we would only have 1. Thank you, I didn't make that very clear. The fire liaison, Krista Halt, has looked at this and has indicated that they have no problem with it in terms of fire safety, so long as Lot 2, the house on Lot 2, is sprinkled. So if we have a sprinkler in the house in Lot 2, they have no problem with that. And we've reviewed this with the planning department as well, have not received any negative comments from the planning department, and would recognize the fact that we would need a reciprocal easement between the 2 parcels for the driveway, and would have that agreement as condition of approval today. I do want to point out that I understand that there was a neighbor, Mary Jo Dudek, who appeared, I think, 2 months ago, or whenever the original hearing was, last month, then indicated opposition to this. And I would point out that I I did have a conversation with Mary Jo Dudek late this evening, approximately 5 o'clock, 5:30, because I was inquiring about her letter from 2019 to Mr. Demakis, where she expressed some interest in purchasing a portion of the property. And Mr. Demakis has been leery of selling any of the property, but today we had a discussion and he agreed that if Ms. Dudek was interested in the property, that he would consider an offer from her. So I will certainly let her speak for herself. I know I contacted her at the last minute, and I don't want to put any pressure on her. And if she needs additional time to consider that offer, we certainly have no problem with the board, again, adjourning this and allowing us the opportunity to work something out, which would mean that hopefully this board would not have to make a decision on this application. So Mr. Demakis is here, as I've indicated. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Peter, did you want to add anything?
If we were to adjourn to permit you and your client an opportunity to speak with Ms. Dudek, what would be a sufficient period of time for you? 30, 60, 90 days?
Oh, go ahead. Please go ahead. First, I was going to say, I think 30 days is sufficient, but whatever Ms. Dudek thought was sufficient, we would agree to.
Okay. I believe I see her in the audience, so. Do we have any other questions right now for Mr. Palumbo or his client? Okay, so why don't we see if there's anyone from the audience to speak on the petition and invite them forward? And I will note that I believe Ms. Dudek spoke last time, but there is obviously new information that was put on the record, so if I could. Is this what you gave us last time? No, it's okay.
So again, my name is Mary Jo Dudek, and my husband and I have lived at 4835 Harlem Road for the last 34 years. And I would like to speak in opposition to the proposed appeal at 4831 Harlem Road, where the owner is requesting the Zoning Board of Appeals allow him to build 2 homes, one behind the other on the half-acre lot. To meet that 60-foot frontage, he would need to place the home one behind the other, and that means the home would not face Harlem Road, which right now is against New York town law. As the board considers this appeal, there are several factors that must be taken into account, which are detailed in New York Town Law, Section 267, B3B. I would like to address 3 of the 5 factors under this section. First, the board must consider whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties will be created by granting the area variance. My property sits directly north of 4831 Harlem Road. The proposed structures would have the buildings shifted to the northern property line to allow for a road that both homes would share as a driveway. One home would face Harlem Road, but the other home would be actually facing south, and this would mean the back of the house and its backyard would face my home. And I would like to point your attention to the next 3 pictures. The first is picture 1, which is the southern view of my house, which has 6 windows, which would face the backyard and the back of the house of the second house. Picture 2 is my back deck that would also face the back side of the house. And picture 3 is my backyard behind my garage. Sorry, my dogs were playing. There will be a detriment to the nearby properties because the proposed homes will be wedged into a small plot of land, and the layout of the home will negatively impact our privacy, as the placement of the homes will allow the occupants to directly see into my home. They'll be able to view my living room, my bedroom, my kitchen, and my bathroom without much effort. An undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood by increasing the population on an already crowded street. Our street can be very busy, therefore we rely on the privacy of our backyards to escape the traffic and noise. This will be destroyed by the two homes being placed here, as those living in the homes will be able to look directly into our yards. A second factor to be considered is whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood. The following pictures attest to the wildlife that use this land for shelter currently. The lot has been home to cardinals, woodpeckers, owls, red fox, and generations, and I have to stress, generations of deer that even feed on the fruit trees my husband and I planted. Finally, the last factor is whether the alleged difficulty was self-created. I have watched several proposals come to you, and with each person primarily last month, the question was asked, have you spoken with your neighbors? We have never spoken to the owner about his plan to modify the land. In fact, he's been absent, except in 2019 when he attempted to get a different variance of the land. This is the first time in 2019 when I saw him in person. As mentioned last month, my husband and I have taken care of this property for years, mowing the lawn to control rodent infestations and clearing the sidewalk of snow since the 90s. We have made several attempts to purchase the land, and I heard Mr. Palumbo mention the price of under $90,000. The last attempt I made with Mr. Demakis outside of that email, he quoted me the price of $100,000. And after the owner was denied by the town to split the property, so each time he quoted me a price of at least double the assessed value of the land, once telling me the reason for the high price was because it's one of the last empty lots in Snyder, and therefore it was worth more. It's my hope that the board will deny this variance, and I got to tell you, I'm really, really nervous because Mr. Palumbo called me at 5:17 this afternoon. I contacted several neighbors. I don't know if they contacted you. They're very upset. I don't know what whether or not they spoke to their opposition. But I almost felt as though I couldn't make this decision because I already invited them and told them about this meeting. And doing so would kind of be backtracking on my word. So if you were to go forward with this, I'd like to ask you to place the following conditions. Allow only one-story homes, especially for the home in the back. Have the road they would need to build be placed on the north side of the property with tall shrubs, and the houses built closer to the south property line. And I do this only because it's already a multi-family home, and there's only 2 windows on that side of the house. Increase the footage the homes need to be placed off the property lines to at least 25 feet, and mandate a 6-foot fence be built around both backyards. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else here to speak on this petition?
Before she starts, I'd asked Tom if he could pull up an aerial. Can we just pull that up?
To look while they're speaking, or do you have a question for the neighbor?
No, so
Okay.
I can just orient myself on where the neighbors are.
My name is Jane Cox, and I have lived at 4584 Harlem between Main and Sheridan for more than 45 years. My house was built in 1920 by my grandfather and his family, and we've maintained the house since. The vacant lot at 4831 Harlem has come before ZBA in the past, when the owner wanted to divide it into 2 lots, each with frontage on Harlem. That request was denied because there wasn't enough frontage for new builds. For the current request, the owner wants to build 2 houses on this wooded lot, one at the front of the property and the other in the backyard, both sharing a driveway, which they would like to call a private road. I don't agree that this is open area development. This lot is in the middle of a block of single-family homes, many as old as mine, 1 to a lot, and they all face Harlem. There is nothing to prevent the owner from building 1 house on this lot. 2 houses would be very disruptive to the nearby neighbors. And would any of you want a backyard house next to your backyard? Please deny this request for the following reasons. 1, it is not compatible with the properties adjacent to it and anywhere near the property. 2, it would most definitely depreciate the adjacent property values. And 3, it will alter the character of our neighborhood between Main and Sheridan. No other parcels have 2 homes positioned like this on 1 lot, and there are no private roads off of Harlem. My concern has been allowing a second residence to be built in the backyard of a property on Harlem would set a precedent for other property owners who also have deep lots to build second houses in their backyards with CBA approval. Harlem Road is a busy street with noisy traffic. Our backyards are our sanctuaries for peace and quiet. Please deny this application for the reason I have stated. I realize the attorney has come up with a last-minute plan to adjourn this, but I'd like to see this request denied and let them go back to the drawing board. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is anyone else here to speak on this petition? Okay, no one else is coming forward, but Mr. Palumbo is.
First of all, as you know, this is not an area variance, so the 267 discussion has no relevance to an open area development. That's number 1. Number 2, I get it. I understand when people face something different than what's there. I understand it. But I sort of at a loss to understand why a backyard can't back up to another backyard. I've lived with houses in my backyard my entire life, and I'm sure many of you have as well. So I'm not sure, exactly what the big problem is there. In terms of animals living there, something eventually, hopefully, will be built there whether you deny this or not. So the animals are going to go wherever the animals go. The other thing is, I understand Ms. Dudek's issue with backtracking with her neighbors, but I think what we have to consider here is that she's going to be doing them a favor if we adjourn this and we end up with some resolution rather than moving forward this evening. In terms of depreciation of property, this is not a new concept. Anytime you see 2 homes on one seemingly looking lot, that means an open development area has been approved. Drive down North Forest sometime. They're all over the place. This is not a novel concept. It exists throughout the town of Amherst. In terms of the conditions, I don't know that we would have any problem with moving the driveway to the north side rather than the south. I don't think that's an issue. A fence would not be an issue. 1 story is likely an issue because we would limit the number of potential purchasers considerably. But the other 2 conditions of approval, if the board considered it, we would have no problem with. And finally, I don't know if I said this already, but the depreciation of the property, you can't just stand here and make that statement without having some proof. Because as I said, there's open development areas all over the town, and there's beautiful homes on those open area developments that certainly don't appreciate the value of their neighbor's property. So again, I think it still would be in the best interest of everyone if it would be adjourned, allow us additional time to discuss it, and if we don't come to a resolution, then the board certainly could vote at the next meeting.
Okay, I'm going to ask if you could explain, for the benefit of Mrs. Dudek and other neighbor who's here, what you mean by open development area, because we've heard that term before, but I'm sure they have not. So could you please explain for the record what Town Code Section 280A3 requires us to consider?
It's an excellent question. The answer to the question is there's really no great guidance in 280A in terms of what the standards are. All it essentially says in paragraph D is that if you don't have frontage on a public road, then the building commissioner has the right to have, it says town board, but in town of Amherst, they've authorized the zoning board to make this decision as well, to consider whether or not to issue an open development area so that the lot that does not have frontage can have a building permit issued. Absent frontage on a public road or an open development area, can't have a building permit issued. So that's really as simple as it is. That's what 280A-D says.
And I'll just go to Mr. Ulatowski for some further explanation so the neighbors can understand.
So if you recall, this same matter was considered by the board for a private roadway on Klein Road. And we provided you with guidance. It was a case law guidance. And essentially, what that guidance says is that you have to determine whether or not the means of ingress and egress is safe for emergency vehicles to respond to an incident. And that's what it comes down to when you're seeking an open development area through 280A of New York State Town Law. It's can they provide sufficient access that's safe for emergency response?
Okay. Now, well, hold on a minute. Now that we have the standard explained for us, I do have to say, Mr. Palumbo, I'm a little upset that you did not call Mrs. Dudek until this evening, because we adjourned it at the last meeting, and there was a lot of time that we could have had these conversations, and I completely sympathize with someone being asked a few minutes before a meeting whether they want to make a very large, substantial purchase. So I don't know if she's even had time to think about that. It seems like not at all. So I would like to adjourn for that purpose, because I don't think you can throw that at someone within an hour of a meeting.
I take full responsibility for that.
I take full responsibility for that. I involved in a bunch, I travel a lot on business, and it was.
I understand. I get it. It's done.
The only other thing I would say is I kept waiting for the video to show up so that I could watch it, and I could never find it because it's not, it used to be listed with the agenda, and it's not there anymore, but I guess I have to go on YouTube or something.
Yeah, they're now displayed on YouTube.
That's my poor defense.
Okay. So I don't want to get into a back and forth, but because Mrs. Dudek is here, you have to come forward, though, because we have to get you on the record if you're going to speak. So we'll let her say one more thing for the record tonight, and then I'm going to make a motion.
So the gentleman over here just discussed about the access to the fire equipment and the ambulances and things like that. If you've ever spent any time on Harlem Road on a Thursday afternoon or a Friday afternoon when traffic is backed up all the way from Maine until Burroughs, both ways, you will understand that fire trucks have a very difficult time getting through our street. Additionally, every neighborhood has its own flavor. This is a very old neighborhood.
Yes.
And the homes don't point that way.
Okay, let me just back up for 1 second to what you said about the emergency vehicles. So I want to make sure you understand what we're talking about with this standard.
Thank you.
It's not whether the emergency vehicles can get down Harlem Road. That's going to be a problem no matter what goes on this property. It's whether or not emergency vehicles can safely access that lot number 2 back there,
Gotcha.
right? So if that, see where it says 20 feet, if that's wide enough, as determined by the fire inspector, that an emergency vehicle can access that second lot, then they've met their standard, their burden. So there's not a whole lot for us to debate up here, unfortunately, given that standard. So
Can I just ask one other question? Mr. Palumbo talked about the section that I read off, and he said it had no bearing. Yet, when you look at the agenda packet, those were the things that were listed, so.
I agree that it is in the packet, that standard, so I understand that that is confusing. So I think it would behoove everyone if we adjourn this for tonight. If nothing else, it's gonna push off anything for this property for another month. So I will make a motion to adjourn so that Mr. Palumbo can get on the phone tomorrow with you. So you have a sufficient amount of time to talk about this potential deal. Do I have a second?
I'll second it, but with a comment.
Sure.
I think that both parties have to work toward a resolution here. I was happy to hear finally, after all this time, that that the offer was made to sell a portion of the property, and I think that's a good thing. But I certainly hope that that offer is an offer of a reasonable price and not just, you know, just something to just thrown out there, because this really shouldn't have to come back here again.
And if the deal does not go through, I hope that the petitioner and his attorney can look at the conditions that were put forth in Ms. Dudek's presentation, and we can provide you a copy of that so that you can be prepared to maybe discuss those with her in your conversations. So do we have any opposition to the motion to adjourn? Okay, hearing none, the motion is granted, 5-0, and we will hopefully hear from you next month.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we have to pivot back to item number 7, which I called out and no one responded. Do we have 6040 North Bailey in the room? No one is coming forward or answering. So I will make a motion to adjourn item number 7, and hopefully we can get a hold of them. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, any opposition? We do have one abstention from member Schubert. Do we have any other opposition? None. 4-0, we are adjourning item number 7. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Okay, I'll second. No opposition. We are finished for tonight. Thank you.